Welcome and thank you for joining us today. NCDIT Secretary James Weaver will provide brief comments on the state budget that Governor Roy Cooper recently signed, as well as President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package. Nate Denny, NCDIT Deputy Secretary of the Broadband and Digital Equity Division, will then give us some additional details and then be available along with Angie Bailey, Interim Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office, to respond to your questions. We ask that you please use the raise hand feature. We'll unmute you one at a time to announce your name and media outlet and ask your questions. We'll reply to them in the order that we receive them. Once your question has been answered, please lower your hand. And now I'll turn it over to Secretary Weaver.
Thank you, Crystal, and good afternoon, everybody. President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package will bring close to $1 billion to North Carolina to help us close the digital divide. These funds, on top of Governor Cooper's nearly $1 billion plan for state funds to build digital equity, will help every household in North Carolina have an affordable, high-speed internet connection to fully participate in the digital economy. The combination of state and federal funding offers us a unique opportunity to be able to provide long-term solutions in a short time, provide infrastructure solutions that work well into the future, and truly set North Carolina to rank in the top five as the top 5 state for high-speed internet adoption by 2025. But most importantly, it's going to bring access to modern-day necessities like telehealth, online education, remote work options, online job boards, and much, much more to over 1.1 million North Carolinians who today lack access to an internet connection, cannot afford the internet, or do not have adequate device or digital skills. My agency is looking forward to continuing to partner with our internet service providers, local governments, and innovative private sector organizations to create digital inclusion plans and bring broadband infrastructure to rural areas, unserved and underserved areas. Thank you for the opportunity to make some comments. I'm now going to turn it over to Nate Denny, who's my Deputy Secretary for our Broadband and Digital Equity Office. Nate?
Thank you, Secretary Weaver. As Secretary Weaver said, with potentially as much as $1 billion from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure package and the General Assembly appropriating and Governor Cooper signing more than $1 billion in American Rescue Plan funds, North Carolina is receiving as much as $2 billion to make a really unprecedented generational investment in connectivity here in North Carolina. The goals that Governor Cooper's plan has set out for us are to use these funds to raise the percentage of North Carolina households with high-speed internet subscriptions from 73% to 80%, to increase the percentage of households with school children from 81% to 100% subscription, permanently closing what's called the homework gap in North Carolina, and to make these improvements and increase adoption of high-speed internet with these subscription rates to 80%, not just as an average, but across racial demographic groups. White households in North Carolina currently subscribe at about a 76% rate, Latino households at 68%, Black households at 64%, and Native American households at 57%. And we want to make sure each of these groups is realizing the benefits of these investments. Of course, we have priorities also to address affordability. We have to tackle the cost of high-speed internet if we're going to hit these adoption numbers. And then we want to get 98% of North Carolina households access to a high-speed internet connection now. So those are kind of the top line goals that Governor Cooper has set out for us, that the General Assembly has funded in its budget, that the governor just signed. You know, at the same time, we are closely tracking the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, which will include $100 million as a block for North Carolina to invest in last mile infrastructure improvements, as well as a share of nationally $4 billion in funding for really the highest cost areas of the state, of which North Carolina, as a very rural state with a diverse geographic population and characteristics, we will have, I think, a lot of those high cost areas and then an additional $37 billion for last mile infrastructure that we'll get a formula share of. We also will have access to funds for digital equity capacity building and for up to $1 billion available nationally for middle mile infrastructure improvements. So North Carolina, as I'm sure many of the folks on the call know, already benefits from a very strong middle mile network, and we have the structures built in place in our new division of broadband and digital equity, our existing broadband infrastructure office and our new office of digital equity and literacy, the structures in place to really hit the ground running with the funding from both the state budget and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and to make these investments effectively in as expeditious a manner as we can, and with always good stewardship of the taxpayers' dollars top of mind. I'll quickly run through the highlights of funding in the state budget. It includes $380 million for the state's existing last mile grant program, the so-called GREAT grants. That's $350 million in ARPA funds and $30 million from the state's capital infrastructure fund. $400 million in a new program called Completing Access to Broadband. That is a competitive bidding program that allows counties in the state to match their ARPA funds and go out directly to the market to try and address connectivity needs. $90 million for stopgap solutions. That's anything kind of sub-fiber deployment to address localized needs like construction of a new tower or downtown Wi-Fi projects. And then $100 million for pole replacements, for utility pole replacements in support of broader fiber deployments. So all told, that's $950 million roughly for broadband infrastructure deployment, as well as an additional $50 million over the next 4 years for our digital literacy and awareness efforts. So that will be helping make sure North Carolinians have access to the kinds of devices and skills and training necessary to fully take advantage of the digital economy, and making sure that North Carolinians know about the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, formerly the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, so that we can start to address the challenge of the high cost of monthly subscriptions to high-speed internet. So that's kind of a quick rundown of what's in the budget. And with that, I will yield, but I'm happy to address any questions. Thank you.
We'll now take your questions. Please remember to use the raise hand function, and we will answer the questions as they come in. Again, please use the raise hand function if you have any questions that you would like the Deputy Secretary of the Broadband, the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity, or his team to answer. There's a question from Ryan Johnston.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to ask a question. Apologies.
Quite okay. Any questions? Okay, we'll wait another minute or so, and if we have no questions, Brian Johnston, looks like you do have a question this time.
Have you, Nate or Jim, spoken to other states about what their plans are, and just kind of is this some is this new funding an area where you and your colleagues in other states are kind of bouncing ideas off of each other?
Yeah, I'll go first with that one, Nate. So thank you for the question, Ryan. So as part of the National Association of State CIOs, or NASCIO, if I use that acronym, this is a topic at the forefront of discussion repeatedly as to what it is that each of the states are doing. How is that funding flowing? North Carolina is in a unique situation because in a lot of states, broadband's not directly under the Secretary of Information Technology or state CIO role, but it's kind of shared across a number of different agencies. We're very fortunate that Governor Cooper elected to focus the efforts through our agency here in NCDIT. And I think truly we are one of the national leaders, if not the national leader, on the most comprehensive plan that's out there. When you think about addressing accessibility to broadband, the affordability piece, and some of the things that the governor was looking to fund, as well as around digital literacy and enablement. So we've had a lot of conversations. I don't know many states that are really focused on the literacy and enablement piece. And with that, I'll let Nate kind of chime in on some of his discussions with his colleagues.
Yeah, I think Secretary Weaver captured it. We are in both Angie Bailey, the interim director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office, and I are in weekly conversations in several different kind of stakeholder convening efforts to bring states together and share ideas and best practices, and to hear, I think importantly, from the internet provider community, from the range of think tanks and consultants who kind of work around this space and understand from both a public and a private sector perspective how states can make sure they're pursuing these investments in as impactful a way as possible. And then importantly, also with the federal agencies that are key to this effort, right? So the FCC, which we mentioned already, because they house the Emergency Broadband Benefit, which is becoming the Affordable Connectivity Program, the NTIA, which is an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce that will be kind of the central holding point for a lot of the federal funds through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that will come down to the states, and with other federal entities. So I'd say that's a really active conversation. It's a good question because I think there are issues that we're all trying to address. You know, we are not the lone state to use American Rescue Plan funds to address connectivity, but as Secretary Weaver said, you know, I think as we watched other states announce their plans, it looked like we had one of the several biggest plans, and importantly, one of the most comprehensive. We're not just talking about how to put money in the ground for infrastructure deployment, because if I run fiber right by your house, but you still can't afford it, or you don't have a smartphone or a device to use it, you still aren't able to really maximize your participation in the digital economy, in the modern economy today. So as Secretary Weaver said, I think Governor Cooper produced a really comprehensive view of how to build digital equity. And as a result, we're going to be in a really good position relative to other states, which is good because our challenge in North Carolina has been that we have just gotten a budget signed, right? So other states have had an advantage is that their budgeting process concluded earlier. And so, you know, some states are able to start their grant programs, for example, sooner than we're able to. But again, we've got the infrastructure in place to really hit the ground running now that the budget's in place.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the question, Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan, let me add to that too. And I think Nate covered that in his opening comments too. I think one of the things that makes North Carolina a leader is really we're trying to truly address the digital divide that does exist. And so those target measures that Governor Cooper has established for us across the racial subdivisions, when we look at children that are in school, you know, household connectivity in that regard, you know, I'm not aware of any other state that's looking at it in such a comprehensive manner as what the governor has elected to do here in North Carolina. So that's truly exciting.
Mm-hmm. Kind of also a more national issue. I know that North Carolina has prepared for this, but what does it mean for North Carolina that the FCC maps might not be available until like 2023? Does it mean anything? Because I know that you guys have data efforts ongoing.
Yeah, if I can just jump in on that, Ryan, functionally, here's what it means. The NTIA broadband infrastructure funds won't be made available to states until the mapping process is complete, right? So there will be a delay in some of the federal broadband funds going to all states, not just North Carolina, while we wait for better maps. Day to day, what it means for us is, really not a lot, because we've got our mapping effort underway here, right? We've DIT houses the Government Data Analytics Center, which has a geospatial unit that's already helping us begin the mapping process. And Crystal, if you could throw the NC1 map link in the chat, I think that would be a useful resource, so that Ryan and others can see kind of where our mapping efforts are so far. I'd say the General Assembly included $1 million for mapping efforts in the state budget. So the critical point here is that we're not waiting for the FCC. We've got to make investments so that we can start investing our resources or using our broadband infrastructure resources effectively and in a strategic way if possible, now, not sitting around waiting for the NTIA maps.
Yeah, and Ryan, it's more than just a mapping effort too. We really need to get down to that granular level of the detail at the household. So as Nate talked about earlier, if we have fiber service being delivered to a household, but yet we don't have a connection being made, understanding the why that connection is not being made is extremely important, and it's going to help drive some of the decision-making processes as we go forward and administer this generational opportunity here to get North Carolina connected.
Mm-hmm. Just so I'm clear, when you say the NTIA funds, do you mean you don't mean the funds from the infrastructure bill that just passed?
Yeah, I do. The broadband infrastructure funds specifically. Actually, I think the digital equity funds also go through NTIA, but the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act makes the overall most of the overall $65 billion investment in broadband and digital equity with NTIA. Okay. What I think the President Biden's administration and Congress did well was to immediately turn that around to states, right, and funnel that money through state investment strategies, so that there's kind of local skin in the game and local planning around what local needs are, rather than having the feds direct that from the very beginning or throughout the process, right? So that's the starting point. When the funds come to North Carolina, they will come from NTIA.
Okay, awesome. I think that's all the questions I had.
Thanks, Ryan.
Do we have any other questions? It looks like we have one from Chris Agner.
Christy, we can't hear you.
No questions. My questions were answered earlier. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ryan Johnston, do you have another question?
I must be pressing the wrong button. I have no questions.
Any additional questions? WRAL TV, I see you just joined. Do you have any questions? If so, use the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. Okay, I'm adding the link that Nate referenced earlier to the chat, so you'll have that. And seeing no additional questions, I think we shall conclude. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate everything. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everybody.